A crimson trail marked the Duke's path through the forest as he clutched his wounded side, royal blood seeping through embroidered finery. The ambush had been swift, deadly, and precisely executed, another victim of the brewing conflict between rival noble houses. Stumbling into a humble cottage on the outskirts of his vast estate, he collapsed at the feet of Elena Blackwell, a simple herbalist with calloused hands and knowledge passed down through generations of women scorned as witches. With steady hands that betrayed no fear of consequence for touching nobility without permission, she extracted the poisoned blade and applied her forbidden remedies through the night while death hovered nearby. What compels a man of such power to defy centuries of tradition for a woman born in dirt? And what happens when gratitude evolves into something that threatens the very foundation of the realm? The thatched roof of Elena's cottage leaked when it rained, but she'd learned to position her herb drying rack strategically to avoid the drips. Morning light filtered through the single window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air as she ground-dried chamomile with a mortar and pestle that had belonged to her grandmother. Outside, the village of Willowbrook was already stirring. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, children's voices carried on the breeze, and the smell of baking bread wafted from the communal ovens. Elena carefully wrapped her herbs in bundles secured with twine, feverfew for headaches, yarrow for wounds, valerian for sleep. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, calloused from years of gathering, digging, and preparing remedies. These bundles were more than medicine. They represented generations of knowledge, passed down through women who had often been viewed with suspicion and fear. Mistress Elena, a frantic knock interrupted her work. "It's my boy, the fever's worse." She recognized Thomas Miller's voice, grabbed her medicine pouch, and hurried outside. The miller's son had been ill for 3 days, his small body burning with fever that wouldn't break. "I've brought payment." Thomas held out 2 loaves of fresh bread, his eyes hollow with worry. Elena nodded, accepting the bread, though she would have come regardless. "How long has he been this way?" "Since dawn. He's seeing things that aren't there." The miller's cottage was like most in Willowbrook, simple, cramped, with earthen floors and few possessions. 6-year-old Will lay on a straw mattress, his face flushed and eyes glassy. Elena placed her hand on his forehead and felt the dangerous heat. "Fetch clean water and cloths," she instructed the boy's mother, who hovered nearby. From her pouch, Elena produced a small bottle of willow bark tincture. 3 drops now, 3 at sunset. As she worked, Elena was acutely aware of the contrast between her world and that of the nobility. Just last month, Lord Bedford's daughter had fallen ill with similar symptoms. A physician had been summoned from the capital, arriving in a gleaming carriage to treat the girl with imported medicines that cost more than Elena's cottage. Meanwhile, in Willowbrook, children like Will relied solely on her knowledge and the plants she could gather. By midday, Will's fever had lessened slightly. Elena left additional medicine and clear instructions, then made her way to the village square, where market day was in full swing. The tax collector's table stood prominently in the center, a constant reminder of the burden placed on those who had least to give. "Witch," someone muttered as she passed. Elena pretended not to hear. Such whispers had followed her since childhood, when her mother had taught her to identify medicinal plants and which prayers to say while harvesting them. "Elena, martyr," the baker's wife waved her over. "My joints pain me something fierce with the damp weather." "I'll bring a salve tomorrow," Elena promised, accepting the small coin Marta pressed into her palm. A commotion near the road drew everyone's attention. Royal guards passed through on horseback, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. Villagers bowed their heads respectfully, some moving completely off the road. The guards barely glanced at them, focused on their journey to or from the Duke's hunting lodge in the nearby forest. That evening, as Elena stoked her small fire, old Hannah knocked at her door. The elderly woman was the closest thing Elena had to family since her mother's passing. "They've raised the grain tax again," Hannah reported, settling her aching bones on Elena's single stool. "And there's talk of bandits in the western woods." Elena poured a cup of mint tea for her visitor. The same woods the Duke hunts in. The very same, though they say these aren't ordinary bandits. Hannah lowered her voice. Whispers say they wear the colors of Baron Caldwell beneath their disguises. Politics, even here, miles from court, the games of the nobility cast long shadows. Elena had treated too many who suffered from these power struggles, farmers conscripted for petty wars, children orphaned by conflicts that meant nothing to common folk. The world's changing, girl, Hannah continued, warming her gnarled hands around the cup. There's unrest everywhere. Even the Duke's position isn't as secure as it once was. Elena nodded absently, her mind on Will Miller and the 3 other villagers who needed her attention tomorrow. The machinations of nobles were distant concerns compared to the immediate needs of her community. As night fell, she hung fresh bundles of herbs from the ceiling beams, rosemary, sage, thyme and lavender filling the cottage with their protective fragrance. Tomorrow would bring new ailments to treat, more remedies to prepare. Another day of walking the delicate line between healer and suspected witch. Little did she know how dramatically her humble existence was about to change. Morning light streamed through tall windows of stained glass, casting colored patterns across the Duke of Westmoreland's private chambers. Alexander Hawthorne, 4th Duke of his line, turned the heavy gold signet ring on his finger. A habit when deep in thought. The ring bore his family crest, a hawk with spread wings, clutching a sword in its talons. It represented not just his name, but centuries of power, responsibility, and the weight of expectations from both the living and the dead. "The Baron's envoy awaits your response, Your Grace," said Frederick, his steward of 20 years. Alexander sighed, setting aside the correspondence he'd been reviewing since dawn. "Tell him I will consider his proposal, but make no commitments. And the matter of the northern borders, double the patrols discreetly." The Duke rose and moved to the window, overlooking the courtyard below where guards drilled in formation. "Has there been word from the king? His Majesty remains at the Summer Palace. The royal treasurer, however, has sent another reminder about the quarterly taxes." Politics was a game Alexander had mastered out of necessity rather than inclination. At 38, he'd held the dukedom for 12 years following his father's unexpected death. Those years had taught him that real power lay in careful balance, appearing traditional enough to maintain the noble's support, while being just progressive enough to avoid peasant unrest. "Your Grace." A new voice entered the chamber as Captain James Harlow, commander of his personal guard, arrived with a bow. "The hunting party is prepared whenever you are ready." Alexander nodded. These monthly hunts were ostensibly recreation, but served as critical opportunities to build alliances and take the measure of potential rivals in an informal setting. Today's group included 2 loyal vassals and Baron Caldwell's son, a calculated invitation to the family whose ambitions had become increasingly transparent. An hour later, Alexander rode through the forest that had belonged to his family for generations, the weight of his signet ring matched by the weight of his responsibilities. His hunting party followed at a respectful distance. "Beautiful morning, Your Grace," remarked young Lord Caldwell, maneuvering his horse alongside Alexander's. "My father sends his regrets that he could not join us." "A pity," Alexander replied diplomatically, though they both knew it was not. Baron Caldwell had made his opposition to several of Alexander's policies increasingly clear, particularly the Duke's recent reduction of grain taxes in response to last season's poor harvest. "He feels your approach to the peasantry is unusually generous," Caldwell continued, his tone carefully neutral. "I find well-fed subjects are less likely to rebel," Alexander replied with equal care. The young lord laughed as though at a jest. "Indeed, though some at court whisper that such leniency might be interpreted as weakness." Alexander turned to study the man, noting the calculated assessment behind his seemingly casual manner. At court, such conversations occurred behind layers of protocol and pretense. Here, among the ancient oaks, words became slightly less guarded, which was precisely why these hunts were valuable. Those who confuse compassion with weakness often discover their error too late. Alexander said mildly, touching the hilt of his sword. The moment was interrupted by the sound of hunting horns as their quarry was spotted. The party moved deeper into the forest, conversation giving way to the excitement of the chase. That evening back at Westmoreland Castle, Alexander dined with his cousin, Lady Margaret, one of the few people with whom he could speak freely. Caldwell tests boundaries, he told her, swirling wine in a goblet of Venetian crystal. His son all but issued a challenge today. They've been courting support from the Eastern lords, Margaret replied. She had always been his best source of court intelligence. And there are rumors they've sent emissaries to neighboring kingdoms. Alexander removed his signet ring, placing it on the table between them. In the candlelight, the gold gleamed with the patina of generations. Father always said this ring is not just a symbol of our family, but a reminder that our choices affect thousands. Your father was not facing the challenges you are, Margaret countered. The old alliances are shifting. The king grows more detached, and your continued bachelorhood makes you vulnerable. Lady Catherine would strengthen your position considerably, Margaret finished for him. A match with the king's niece would secure royal favor. Alexander nodded, though the prospect of the arranged marriage brought him little joy. Lady Catherine was beautiful and politically advantageous, but their few meetings had revealed little warmth beneath her perfect courtly manner. The Privy Council meets tomorrow, he said, returning the ring to his finger. Baron Caldwell will undoubtedly oppose my plans for the new road through the western villages, because it would reduce his control over regional trade, Margaret noted. Precisely. Later, alone in his chambers, Alexander stood at the window watching moonlight silvering the castle grounds. Tomorrow would bring more political maneuvering, more decisions that balance tradition against progress, more careful navigation of rivalries and alliance. Little did he know that his carefully ordered world was about to face its greatest disruption from the most unexpected quarter. The royal carriage jostled over rutted roads, each bump sending waves of pain through Alexander's wounded side. 4 days had passed since the ambush. 4 days spent recovering in the humble cottage of a peasant woman whose hands had saved his life when his own guards had fallen. Now cradled in silk cushions instead of straw, the Duke clutched a small vial of dark liquid inside his doublet pocket, pressing it against his heart like a talisman. "We approach the castle, Your Grace," announced Captain Harlow, riding alongside the carriage window. His face bore the guilt of a man who had failed in his primary duty. Only by chance had he been checking the perimeter when the attackers struck, allowing him to escape and organize the rescue party that had eventually found their wounded duke, though not where they expected. Alexander nodded, steeling himself for the performance ahead. Weakness, even from injury, could not be displayed. Politics at court circled like vultures over any sign of vulnerability. The castle gates opened, and a reception awaited his steward, his cousin Margaret, members of his household staff, and hovering anxiously at the rear, the royal physician. "Your Grace," Frederick bowed deeply as guards assisted Alexander from the carriage. "The entire household has been in prayer for your safe return." "God has seen fit to preserve me," Alexander replied, his voice steady despite the pain. He stood straight, refusing support, though sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. Through the skill of an unexpected healer, whispers immediately rippled through the assembled staff. Captain Harlow had sent word ahead about the circumstances of the Duke's survival, and already speculation was building. Alexander climbed the castle steps with deliberate dignity. Behind him, servants unloaded the carriage, including a carefully packed basket of herbs that the peasant woman, Elena, he reminded himself, her name is Alan, had prepared with precise instructions. In his private chambers, the royal physician, Master Reynolds, examined the wound with growing astonishment. "Remarkable," he muttered, probing the nearly closed gash that should have been festering. "Most remarkable. And you say a village herbalist treated this?" She removed the blade and treated the wound with poultices and tinctures, Alexander replied, wincing slightly as Reynolds prodded a tender spot. The physician sniffed disapprovingly. Folk remedies, dangerous practices, often little better than superstition. You were fortunate, Your Grace. Had infection set in, Alexander produced the vial from his pocket. She instructed me to take 3 drops of this tincture with wine, morning and evening, until the vial is empty. Reynolds took the vial with obvious skepticism, removing the stopper to sniff its contents. Willow bark, certainly. Perhaps yarrow. Some other elements I cannot immediately identify. His frown deepened. I cannot in good conscience recommend you continue with such unproven concoctions. I have brought medicines from the royal apothecary that would be far more appropriate for a man of your station. Alexander reclaimed the vial with quiet firmness. Yet it seems her unproven concoctions have already accomplished what many would have thought impossible. The rebuke was gentle but clear. Reynolds bowed stiffly and withdrew to prepare his own treatments. Later that evening, when servants had been dismissed and Alexander sat with only Margaret for company, he finally allowed himself to show signs of fatigue. The council has been in disarray, Margaret informed him, pouring wine into 2 goblets. Baron Caldwell has been particularly vocal in your absence, suggesting that perhaps your territories require stronger leadership. Alexander accepted the wine, discreetly adding 3 drops from the peasant's vial, no doubt offering himself as a solution. Naturally, though his ambitions were somewhat tempered when word arrived that you had survived. Margaret watched him with shrewd eye. This peasant woman, is she truly as remarkable as Captain Harlow's report suggests? Alexander considered his response carefully. She treated a wound that your royal physician just admitted should have been fatal, using nothing but knowledge passed down through generations and plants gathered from the forest. She asked nothing in return, though she lives in a cottage with a leaking roof. And she spoke to me not as a duke, but simply as a man in need of healing. He paused, remembering Elena's calm efficiency. Yes, I would say she is remarkable. You sound, Margaret hesitated, impressed. I am, and troubled. Troubled. Alexander sipped his wine, feeling the herbs spread their healing warmth. Troubled that such wisdom exists within my own domains, yet remains so separated from the knowledge of our royal physician. Troubled that accidents of birth place such barriers between people of talent and the recognition they deserve. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. Careful, Dewsons, such thoughts border on the revolutionary. Before Alexander could respond, a knock at the door announced Frederick. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but Lady Catherine has arrived. She insists on seeing you immediately to express her relief at your recovery. Alexander exchanged a glance with Margaret. His intended bride had arrived sooner than expected, no doubt to assess the situation firsthand. The game begins again, he murmured, straightening his doublet and tucking the vial of medicine safely away. Already, within hours of his return, court politics resumed their relentless pace. The wilderness and the simple cottage where he had faced death, seeming increasingly distant. Dawn had barely broken when Elena heard the horses. The rhythmic drumming of hooves approached along the village's main path, too numerous and uniform to be merchants or travelers. She set aside the chamomile she'd been bundling and wiped her hands on her apron. Through her small window she glimpsed sunlight glinting off metal armor. The village fell silent as 6 royal guards on horseback entered, their blue and silver livery marking them as the Duke's own men. Children who had been playing froze in place. Women gathering at the well stood motionless, water buckets forgotten. Men emerging from cottages stared with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Elena stepped outside, heart quickening. Royal guards in Willowbrook could mean many things, none of them usually good. Increased taxes, conscriptions. Had someone been accused of a crime? The captain dismounted, his movements fluid despite his armor. His gaze swept the gathered villagers before settling on Elena. He approached with purposeful strides, a scroll case clutched in his gauntleted hand. "Are you Elena Blackwell, the herbalist?" he asked, voice carrying so all could hear. Elena straightened her spine. "I am." The captain withdrew a scroll from the case, unfurling it with ceremonial precision. The parchment bore an elaborate seal that even illiterate villagers recognized as the Duke's hawk emblem. By order of His Grace Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Westmoreland, you are hereby summoned to present yourself at Westmoreland Castle without delay. He paused, then added with unexpected gentleness, "This is not a matter of wrongdoing, but of honor." Murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. Elena felt blood drain from her face. "The Duke requires my presence," she asked, certain she'd misheard. "Indeed, he wishes to properly express his gratitude for your service." The captain offered the scroll. "His Grace instructed me to ensure you understand this is an invitation, not a command, though he greatly hopes you will accept." Elena took the scroll with trembling fingers. The parchment felt foreign against her rough skin, so smooth and heavy, the ink a deep, rich black, unlike the watery scrawls the village scribe produced. "What service?" someone in the crowd called out. The captain surveyed the villagers. "Your healer saved the Duke's life when he was gravely wounded. His Grace wishes to acknowledge this debt properly." The whispers intensified. Old Hannah pushed forward, her eyes wide. "Elena, is this true?" Elena nodded slowly. "A wounded man came to my door during the storm 5 nights ago. I did not know his identity until later." "You treated the Duke himself?" Thomas Miller gaped in astonishment. "And you never said?" "It wasn't my secret to share," Elena replied quietly. "He was simply a man who needed healing." The captain cleared his throat. "His Grace has sent a carriage for your comfort, which follows behind us. He suggests you bring your medicinal supplies, as the royal physician has expressed interest in your methods." A polite fiction, Elena suspected, recalling the nobleman's reluctance to trust her remedies. "How long am I expected to stay?" she asked. "That was not specified. I would suggest preparing for at least a week." A week. Elena had never been away from Willowbrook for so long. Who would tend to sick children? Who would deliver Marta's baby when her time came? As if reading her thoughts, Hannah touched her arm. "We managed before you came to us, girl. We'll manage a week without you." Elena nodded gratefully. "I'll need to prepare." While the guards waited, the village erupted into frenzied activity. Women hurried to Elena's cottage, bringing their meager offerings, a patched shawl finer than Elena's worn one, a ribbon for her hair, a small jar of precious honey. Men offered solemnly to watch her cottage and garden. Children gathered sprigs of wild flowers for her to take. Inside her cottage, Elena packed her herbs and tinctures with care, selecting her finest remedies and most effective medicines. Hannah helped her fold her spare dress. She owned only 2, into a small bundle. "This could change everything," the old woman murmured, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Not just for you, but for all of us." Elena tied her bundle closed, or it could be nothing more than a nobleman's momentary gratitude, soon forgotten. "No," Hannah shook her head firmly. "I've lived long enough to know when the wind changes direction. Whatever happens at that castle, you won't come back to us the same." The carriage arrived, an ornate conveyance that drew gasps from the villagers. Its polished wood gleamed in the morning light, and its interior was lined with cushions covered in velvet, the color of forest moss. To Elena it looked as alien as a ship sailing through their fields would have. Captain Harlow helped her inside with courteous efficiency. As the carriage began to move, Elena pressed her face to the small window, watching Willowbrook recede, the only home she'd ever known growing smaller with each turn of the wheels. In her lap lay the scroll, its red wax seal unbroken. She ran a finger over the raised impression of the hawk, wondering what fate it was carrying her toward. The carriage wheels rattled over cobblestone as Elena arrived at Westmoreland Castle. Servants rushed forward, helping her descend. She stepped down, clutching her small bundle, feeling out of place in her simple wool dress against the roaring grandeur. The castle soared above, stone towers reaching toward clouds, stained glass windows catching afternoon light. Everywhere Elena looked, she saw wealth beyond imagination. Intricate carvings, exotic gardens, rich fabrics worn even by servants. Mistress Blackwell. A dignified man manxed with a slight bow. I am Frederick, steward to his grace. Welcome to Westmoreland Castle. Elena attempted a curtsy. Thank you, sir. His grace is currently in council, but wishes to receive you this evening. Until then, you'll be shown to your chambers. Frederick gestured toward the castle entrance. Elena followed, conscious of her mud-spattered hem as they passed through marble corridors. Tapestries depicting hunts and battles lined the walls. Servants paused in their duties, watching her with curiosity. The East Wing guest chambers have been prepared, Frederick explained, as they climbed a sweeping staircase. His Grace thought you might appreciate the view of the herb gardens. The door opened to a room larger than Elena's entire cottage, dominated by a canopied bed. Sunlight streamed through windows overlooking geometric herb gardens. Many plants familiar, some she'd only read about. These will be your quarters, Frederick said. Martha will be your personal attendant. He indicated a young woman who had appeared silently. She will assist with anything you require. This is too grand, Elena managed, placing her bundle on a window seat. I'm a simple herbalist, not a noble lady. His Grace insists on honoring you properly. Frederick's expression softened. It is rare for him to express such interest in a guest's comfort. After Frederick departed, Martha stepped forward. Would you like a bath prepared, mistress? And perhaps a change of clothes before meeting His Grace? Elena looked down at her plain dress, suddenly self-conscious. I have only one other dress, and it's no finer than this one. If I may, Martha said hesitantly. Lady Margaret sent several gowns that might be altered to fit you. Hours later, bathed and dressed in borrowed blue linen, Elena barely recognized herself in the mirror. Martha had arranged her hair simply but neatly, adorned with a single ribbon. The audience chamber, while cold small, dwarfed any room in Willowbrook. The Duke stood conversing with an elegantly dressed woman. Both turned as Elena entered. Your Grace, Frederick announced. Mistress Elena Blackwell. Elena curtsied as instructed, keeping her eyes lowered until the Duke spoke. Mistress Blackwell. His voice was warm with recognition. I'm pleased to see you looking well. Thank you, Your Grace. Elena straightened, meeting his gaze. In her cottage, wounded and vulnerable, he had seemed merely a man. Now, his authority was palpable. May I present Lady Catherine Beaumont, the Duke said. My betrothed. The woman's curtsy was perfect, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. So this is the village healer who worked such miracles. How fortunate that you were nearby when His Grace was injured. Something in her tone made Elena wary. I merely applied knowledge passed down through my family, my lady, and saved my life, the Duke added. A debt I intend to acknowledge publicly at tomorrow's court reception. Lady Catherine's smile tightened. How generous, Alexander, though I wonder if such formal recognition might overwhelm someone unaccustomed to court attention. The great hall of Westmoreland Castle blazed with 100 candles. Nobles in their finery filled the space, a sea of silks and velvets. Elena stood in a small antechamber, heart pounding against the confines of her emerald silk gown with gold embroidery. Lady Margaret's insistence for the occasion. Remember, Frederick murmured, when His Grace addresses you, curtsy deeply and do not speak until spoken to. Keep responses brief. Elena nodded, touching the simple gold pendant delivered to her chamber that morning, another loan from Lady Margaret. His Grace, Alexander Hawthorne, Duke of Westmoreland, announced the herald. The assembled courtiers bowed and curtsied as the Duke entered. Alexander moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Lady Catherine followed, her crimson gown and rubies designed to draw every eye. Elena observed how differently the Duke carried himself here compared to the vulnerable man she had treated. The ceremony will begin momentarily, Frederick informed her. Steel yourself. Not everyone will welcome what His Grace intends today. The herald struck his staff against the floor 3 times, calling for silence. My lords, ladies, and honored guests, the Duke's voice carried effortlessly. We gather to acknowledge a debt of the highest order, a life debt. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as he continued. Many have heard rumors of my recent hunting accident. What you may not know is that the blade was poisoned and would have proven fatal without immediate intervention. Lady Catherine's face remained composed, though her fingers tightened around her fan. Providence guided me to a skilled healer who drew the poison from my wound. I would have her recognized not merely as a subject who served her lord, but as one whose knowledge merits our highest respect. Frederick nudged Elena forward. She stepped into the great hall, feeling hundreds of eyes upon her, some curious, others disdainful. She focused solely on the Duke. Elena Blackwell, he addressed her formally. Kneel before your Duke. Elena sank to one knee as instructed, art thundering loudly. For service rendered at risk to yourself, for wisdom applied when conventional medicine would have failed, and for loyalty shown without expectation of reward. I present you with this Medal of Honor, the first ever bestowed upon one not noble born. A collective gasp swept through the assembly. The Duke took from a cushion a medallion, gold and silver, intertwined in the shape of a hawk with an emerald in its talons. He placed it over Elena's head. Rise, Mistress Blackwell, and be recognized. Elena stood, legs trembling beneath her skirts. Would you honor us with a few words? He asked unexpectedly. Elena looked at the sea of faces and touched the medallion. Your Grace, my lords and ladies, I stand before you not because I did anything extraordinary, but because I was taught that all life has value, from the humblest peasant to the noblest duke. She paused briefly. The knowledge I used to heal His Grace passed to me through generations of women who lived and died without recognition. I accept this honor on their behalf, hoping the barrier between common knowledge and noble practice might someday dissolve to the benefit of all. Silence held for 2 heartbeats. Then Baron Caldwell's voice cut through. Are we now to take instruction from peasant women on how to organize our society, Your Grace? The Duke's smile remained fixed, though his eyes hardened. We are to recognize wisdom wherever found. My Lord Baron, a practice I heartily recommend. Scattered laughter diffused the tension, though Elena noted how the room subtly divided, those moving closer to the Duke in support, others drifting toward Caldwell. As the formal ceremony concluded, servants circulated with wine. Elena found herself the center of reluctant attention. Courtiers approaching to examine the medallion with congratulations, ranging from sincere to coldly perfunctory. You've created quite a stir, Lady Margaret murmured, appearing with a glass of wine. Half the court is scandalized, the other half intrigued. Alexander has always pushed boundaries, but this is unprecedented. I never sought recognition, Eleanor said quietly, which is precisely why he gave it. Margaret's shrewd eyes assessed the room. Watch Lady Catherine. She's gathering her allies. Across the hall, Lady Catherine stood surrounded by nobles, her smile bright but eyes cold as she glanced repeatedly toward Elena. The Duke's actions today have political implications far beyond a simple ceremony, Margaret continued. For you've been drawn into a game you don't yet understand, and I fear it's only just beginning. Elena woke to birdsong, momentarily disoriented by the soft feather bed before remembering where she was. 3 days had passed since the ceremony, days filled with stares and whispers whenever she walked the castle corridors. She had taken to rising early, seeking solitude in the herb gardens before most of the court awoke. She dressed in a simple blue gown, another of Lady Margaret's cast-offs, and slipped from her chamber. The corridor was empty, save for a guard who nodded respectfully, his eyes lingering on the medallion she wore. The Duke had made it clear she was to display it always, though its weight still felt foreign. The herb gardens were peaceful in the dawn light. Elena knelt beside a bed of feverfew, examining the plants with a practiced eye. The castle gardeners maintained herbs primarily for beauty rather than medicine, an approach she found wasteful. You're up early. Mistress Blackwell. Eleanor turned to find Master Reynolds, the royal physician, observing her. Their previous encounters had been strained. his pride wounded by the Duke's praise of her remedies. "I've always risen with the sun." "Master Reynolds," she replied, brushing soil from her skirts, "examining our humble garden. I suppose you find it lacking compared to your in-country methods?" "On the contrary," Elena kept her voice neutral, "your collection is impressive, though the yarrow shows signs of rust that better drainage might prevent." A muscle twitched in Reynolds' jaw. "His Grace has requested I observe your methods." "A scholarly interest," he claims. Their conversation was interrupted by Martha, Eleanor's maid, hurrying across the garden. "Mistress Blackwell, you must come quickly. There's been an incident in your chamber." Elena followed Martha back to the castle. 2 battle-hardened guards stood outside her door. Inside, her chamber was in disarray, bed covers torn back, drawers open, possessions scattered. Frederick stood with Captain Harlow by the window. "What happened?" Elena asked. "Someone entered your chamber during breakfast," Frederick explained gravely. "Martha discovered the intrusion. Was anything taken?" Elena checked her mother's herbal and medicinal pouch, her only valuables. "Nothing appears missing. But this was left on your pillow." Frederick handed her a parchment note, written in precise hand, with the words, "Return to your place. Herb which before you fall further than you could imagine." Elena's hand trembled. "Who would—" "We don't know," Captain Harlow interrupted. "But His Grace takes this threat seriously. I'm assigning a personal guard to you, effective immediately." "Surely that's unnecessary." "It is both necessary and non-negotiable," Frederick stated firmly. "The Duke's orders." The door opened, and Alexander entered, his expression darkening at the disarray. Everyone bowed as Elena curtsied, still clutching the note. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "Are you unharmed?" "Yes, Your Grace, nothing was taken." He read the note, jaw tightening, then passed it to Captain Harlow. "This handwriting may be disguised, but compare it to every noble's correspondence. And double the guard here." Alexander turned to Elena. "From this moment, you are officially under my protection. Lieutenant Davis will be your personal guard." A young officer stepped forward. "At your service, mistress." "I don't understand," Eleanor said quietly. "I've done nothing to warrant such hostility." "You've disrupted the established order," Alexander replied softly. "Some fear what that might lead to." Later in Lady Margaret's private chambers, Eleanor confessed her confusion. "I'm a simple herbalist. How does recognizing my skills threaten anyone?" Margaret poured wine for them both. "You represent possibility, that birth does not dictate worth. There's nothing more frightening to those who've inherited, rather than earned their position. The Duke has made me a target." "The Duke," Margaret corrected gently, "has elevated you to a position where your targeting cannot be ignored. Had you remained in your village, who would notice if misfortune befell you?" Elena fingered her medallion. "I could return to Willowbrook. Is that what you wish?" Despite the danger, something had awakened in Elena, a glimpse of a world where her knowledge might reach beyond a single village. "No," she admitted. "Not yet." "Then learn to navigate these waters." Margaret pressed a small dagger into Elena's hand. "The medal offers protection. Wear it always. And keep this with you." "I've never used a weapon," Elena protested. "Pray you never need to. But these are dangerous times, and you've become part of a dangerous game." That night, Eleanor placed the dagger beneath her pillow, the anonymous note tucked into her herbal as a reminder of invisible enemies. Outside her door, Lieutenant Davis stood guard. Within the wider castle, political currents shifted, ripples spreading outward from the moment a simple herbalist had saved a nobleman's life. A week passed without incident, Elena's movements shadowed by Lieutenant Davis, whose presence created a welcome buffer between her and hostile courtiers. This morning, she sat with Master Reynolds in the infirmary, grinding herbs into powder. Their strained relationship had evolved into a cautious exchange, the physician's curiosity gradually overcoming his prejudice. "The proportions must be exact," Elena explained, measuring willow bark and meadow sweet. "Too much of either causes stomach distress." "This relieves headache and fever?" Reynolds asked. "Yes, though not as quickly as your imported medicines." These plants grow abundantly throughout the Duke's lands. Cost-effective medicine for the common folk, Reynolds noted. His Grace would approve. Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion. Guards carried in a young gardener's apprentice with a bleeding leg, pruning accident. Shears slipped. Reynolds examined the wound, while Eleanor prepared cloths and water. The boy, pale with pain, winced at the physician's touch, deep but clean. It needs stitching. Reynolds turned to his assistant. Prepare needle and thread. And the sleeping draught. May I suggest an alternative? Elena ventured. A poultice that numbs the area, allowing you to work without rendering him unconscious. The physician hesitated. Show me, he finally said. Elena retrieved a small jar, a mixture she'd prepared earlier. Spiderwebs to stop bleeding, crushed poppy seeds for pain, and comfrey for healing, she explained, applying the paste. Give it a few minutes. The Duke appeared at the infirmary door. Seeing the injured boy, he approached with concern. What happened? Gardening accident, Your Grace, Reynolds explained. We're trying a treatment method from Mistress Blackwell. Soon, the boy reported his leg felt strange, like it belongs to someone else. Reynolds completed the stitching, while the boy watched with fascination. Remarkable, Reynolds admitted afterward. No pain, immediate recovery, and no wasted medicines. He studied Elena with new respect. Where did you learn this? My grandmother, from a traveling Eastern healer. The Duke nodded thoughtfully. Could this be taught to your apprentices? With Mistress Blackwell's guidance, yes, Reynolds replied. His resistance diminished. After the boy left, Alexander approached Elena. You've proven your value beyond saving my life. He withdrew a small iron key. This opens the private medicinal garden established by my great-grandmother. It's neglected now, but you might restore it. Elena accepted with surprise. This is a great honor. The garden lies beyond the east wall. Few know it exists, providing both opportunity and protection. That afternoon, Elena unlocked an ancient door, revealing a hidden paradise, overgrown but structured, containing dozens of rare medicinal plants she'd only read about. As she walked the paths, she felt connected to the woman who had created this space generations ago, another healer within these walls. For the first time, Eleanor felt truly useful, her knowledge valued not just for saving one life, but potentially many. From a bench, an elderly man observed her. You must be the healer everyone's talking about, he called. I've wondered when Alexander would remember this garden. I'm Elena Blackwell, she curtsied. Lord Thomas Hawthorne, royal historian and forgotten uncle to our Duke. Come sit. I have stories about the woman who created this garden, and you're just the person to appreciate them, Lord Thomas's. Gnarled fingers traced the elaborate family tree painted on parchment as he recounted tales of Hawthorne ancestors. Elena sat beside him in the castle library, sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing between ancient shelves. My grandmother, Eleonora, created the medicinal garden during the plague years, Thomas explained. Court physicians dismissed her efforts as women's dabbling, yet her remedies saved dozens when conventional treatments failed, much like you, he added with a knowing smile. Over the past fortnight, Elena had divided her time between the infirmary, the hidden garden, and these afternoon sessions with Lord Thomas. The elderly historian had taken it upon himself to educate her in court history, politics, and the intricate dance of alliances that shaped noble interactions. Every gesture at court carries meaning, he instructed, pointing to a velvet-bound volume. The depth of a bow, the positioning during a procession, even the color of one's attire, communicates allegiance and intent. Elena absorbed these lessons eagerly. Is that why Lady Catherine wears Caldwell colors at informal gatherings? Thomas's eyes twinkled with approval. You notice much. Yes, her maternal grandmother was a Caldwell. By emphasizing that connection through color, she signals support for their faction without making an explicit declaration. Their conversation was interrupted by a court page announcing the afternoon dance lesson. Elena had been surprised when Lady Margaret insisted she attend these sessions, learning the complex patterns of court dances despite her common birth. Knowledge is armor, Margaret had explained. Even knowledge that seems frivolous. In the great hall, musicians played while the dancing master called instructions. Elena concentrated on following the intricate steps, aware of Lady Catherine and her companions watching from the sidelines with expressions of amusement and disdain. "You improve daily," Lady Margaret commented as they completed a turn. "Soon you'll dance as if born to it." "I doubt that. My hands still bear calluses from real work. A badge of honor, not shame," Margaret replied. "Though I've noticed my nephew doesn't seem to find them objectionable." Before Elena could respond, the dance pattern separated them. When they rejoined, Margaret continued, "Alexander watches you, you know. Not with the passing interest of a patron, but with something deeper." "He watches everyone," Elena deflected. "It's his responsibility to remain aware of all that happens at court." Margaret's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. But she let the subject drop as the music ended. Elena found herself alone near a window, grateful for a moment's respite. She was startled when Lady Catherine appeared beside her, offering wine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've become quite the court sensation," Catherine observed, her tone light but sharp underneath. "From village herbalist to dancing in the great hall in less than a month. How remarkable!" Eleanor accepted the wine cautiously. "His Grace has been most generous in recognizing my service." "Indeed." Catherine's gaze swept over Elena's borrowed finery. "One might almost forget your origins, though of course we never truly escape where we come from, do we?" "I'm proud of my origins, my lady," Eleanor replied carefully, "just as I imagine you take pride in yours." Something flashed in Catherine's eyes, recognition of the subtle reference to her Caldwell connections. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Lord James Caldwell. "Lady Catherine," he bowed, "might I request the honor of a private word?" Catherine's demeanor transformed instantly. "Lord James, of course." She turned to Eleanor with a dismissive nod. "Do excuse us." As they moved away, Elena noticed a small card had fallen from Lady Catherine's sleeve. She picked it up discreetly, freezing when she glimpsed the contents, a dance card for the upcoming summer festival, with Lord James Caldwell's name written multiple times and marked with a star, for the Duke's betrothed to display such preference for a member of a rival house. The political implications were significant. Elena tucked the card into her sleeve, unsure what to do with this information. As she debated, she found herself near the hall's entrance, inadvertently positioned to overhear a hushed conversation. "The Duke grows too comfortable with change," came Lord James's voice. "First this commoner elevated beyond her station, now talk of reducing noble privileges in the northern counties." "Patience," Lady Catherine replied softly. "The festival provides opportunity. Our mutual friends are prepared." Elena's heart quickened. The exchange suggested something beyond mere political maneuvering. She stepped backward, intent on quiet retreat, only to bump into someone behind her. "Finding court conversations educational?" the Duke asked quietly, his hand steadying her elbow. Elena's hands trembled as she relayed what she had overheard, the dance card clutched between her fingers. The Duke's private study was warm, a fire casting shadows across shelves of books. "I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping," she explained. "But their words seemed concerning." Alexander examined the card thoughtfully. "You were right to bring this to me, though Catherine would claim it merely shows her fulfilling social obligations, and the mention of mutual friends being prepared for the festival could be interpreted multiple ways. However, combined with other information I've received." He fell silent, studying Elena with an intensity that made her conscious of their solitude. Being alone with the Duke was precisely what Lord Thomas had warned against, not for fear of Alexander's conduct, but for the inevitable gossip. "I should return to my chambers," she said. Rising, "Wait." Alexander unlocked a cabinet and withdrew a book bound in worn green leather. "This belonged to my great-grandmother, her personal herbal, with remedies recorded in her own hand." Elena accepted it reverently, opening to delicate script and illustrations. This is priceless. I can't possibly— You can and you will, he interrupted gently. Books, like knowledge, wither without purpose. You'll honor her memory by putting it to use. Their fingers brushed, sending warmth up her arm. Elena looked up and found his gaze fixed on her with an expression that stole her words. Your Grace, Alexander, he corrected softly. When we're alone, I'd prefer you use my name. The request crossed boundaries, yet felt natural. Alexander, she repeated, the name feeling strange and wonderful. A knock interrupted them. They stepped apart as Frederick entered, surprised to find Elena there. Lady Catherine requests an audience. Tell her I'll join her shortly, Alexander replied. As Frederick withdrew, the Duke turned to Elena. We'll speak further tomorrow. Keep the dance card to yourself, Elena nodded, clutching the herbal. Thank you for the book, Alexander. The way his expression softened would stay with her long afterward. The following morning, Elena worked in the medicinal garden, tending seedlings. The garden was coming back to life under her care. She didn't notice the Duke's arrival until he spoke. You've performed miracles here. Elena brushed soil from her hands. Just patience and knowledge. The most enduring kind of magic, he replied. The rosemary oil you provided has improved conditions for those recovering from winter fever, combined with Master Reynolds' treatments. We've found a balance, Alexander nodded, pleased. Exactly what I'd hoped for when I brought you here. He hesitated. Among other things, Lady Catherine arrived, her riding habit immaculate. Her smile froze at the sight of Elena kneeling in the garden. So this is where you've disappeared to, she said to Alexander. I had to ask a gardener. I wanted to see Mistress Blackwell's progress, Alexander replied. This garden was important to my great-grandmother. How sentimental. Catherine's gaze lingered on Elena. I'm surprised to find our herbalist on her knees in dirt. Surely such labor could be left to gardeners? The work keeps my hands skilled, Elena answered, rising. There's wisdom in maintaining connection to the earth that provides our remedies. Catherine's arched eyebrow suggested she found the notion absurd. Alexander, the ambassador awaits. She departed with a rustle of fabric and unspoken disapproval. She grows impatient with my attention to matters she deems beneath notice. Alexander observed, She is to be your wife, Elena replied, ignoring the ache the words produced. Her opinions naturally carry weight, do they? The marriage was arranged when we were children, but much has changed. The implications hung between them, dangerous and tempting. You should go, Elena said quietly. The ambassador waits. Alexander nodded, but before leaving brushed soil from her cheek, his touch lingering a heartbeat too long. Until tomorrow, Elena. She remained in the garden long after, her cheek burning where his fingers had touched, aware that she stood on the edge of something that could bring either wonder or destruction. The library was silent, save for the occasional turning of pages and soft candle flickers. Elena had spent hours researching the historical relationships between House Hawthorne and House Caldwell at Lord Thomas's suggestion. The current tensions aren't new, he had explained. Merely the latest chapter in a rivalry spanning generations. What she discovered was troubling. Land disputes, broken betrothals, even whispers of assassinations disguised as accidents. Most concerning was a pattern. Whenever House Hawthorne proposed reforms benefiting commoners, House Caldwell led opposition that often turned violent. Elena rubbed her tired eyes, about to retire when a folded piece of parchment slipped from between pages of a dusty volume. Unlike the yellowed book pages, this paper appeared newer. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a list of names, noble houses allied with the Caldwells, followed by numbers and what appeared to be military positions. Heart racing, she tucked the paper into her sleeve. This was not historical, but something far more current and dangerous. As she gathered her materials to leave, a shadow fell across the table. She looked up to find Lord James Caldwell, studying late Mistress Blackwell. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Such dedication, one might almost forget your humble beginnings. Elena rose, conscious of the document against her wrist. History fascinates me, particularly how patterns repeat themselves. Indeed, his gaze swept over her books, though sometimes the wisest course is to understand which side of history one ought to stand on. He reached for a volume of noble genealogies. This particular tome is needed elsewhere. The Duke's voice cut through as he appeared from between the stacks, Captain Harlow at his shoulder. "You seem to have strayed far from the public sections, Lord James." Caldwell straightened, his expression shifting to deference. "Your Grace, I was merely passing and noticed Mistress Blackwell studying alone. It seemed improper." "Your concern for propriety is noted," Alexander replied coolly. "Captain Harlow will escort you back to more appropriate quarters." Once Caldwell had departed, Alexander turned to Elena. "Are you well?" "When Lieutenant Davis reported you'd been approached, I came immediately." "I'm unharmed," she assured him, then lowered her voice. "But I found something you should see." In the security of the Duke's private study, Elena spread the intercepted document on his desk. It was hidden in a book, recently placed, not forgotten. Alexander studied the paper, his expression darkening. Troop movements. Commitments from various houses, all dated for the summer festival less than a fortnight away. He looked up sharply. Evidence of planned insurrection. The names all belonged to houses historically aligned with the Caldwells, and opposed to my proposed reforms. Alexander ran a hand through his hair. "This confirms what my spies have hinted at. They're planning to use the festival as cover for a coup." "Lady Catherine's name isn't listed," Elena observed. "It wouldn't be. Her value lies in her royal connections and position as my betrothed." His voice carried a bitterness that surprised her. "The perfect spy within my household. You can't be certain of her involvement, can't I?" "The dance card you discovered. Her frequent meetings with Caldwell. The unexplained correspondence intercepted by my guards." He rose and paced the room, the weight of leadership evident in his bearing. "I've suspected for months, but lacked proof. This changes everything. What will you do? Cancel the festival, arrest the conspirators, increase security?" "They'll merely delay their plans," Elena countered. "And you'll have shown your hand without capturing all involved." Alexander looked at her with newfound respect. "You suggest an alternative? Let the festival proceed as planned. But be prepared. Watch for their move and counter it with one of your own." She hesitated. "Use their confidence against them." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face. "You would have made an excellent strategist." "I've had excellent teachers," she replied, thinking of Lord Thomas's lessons and her grandmother's tales of surviving in a world where herb women were often scapegoats, especially about watching for patterns and preparing for storms before clouds gather. "Then help me prepare for this one." He gestured to the chairs by the fire. "We have much to plan and little time." As they bent their heads over maps and guard rotations, Eleanor was acutely aware that she had crossed another boundary, from healer to confidant, from subject to advisor. Each step drew her closer to the Duke, deeper into the dangerous currents of noble politics, and each step made return to her former life seem increasingly impossible. The castle hummed with anticipation as the summer festival approached. Servants hurried through corridors carrying decorations, while kitchens prepared for elaborate feasts. Officially, the festival honored the summer solstice and harvest. Unofficially, it had become a grand display, where noble alliances were forged and broken beneath a veneer of revelry. For Elena, the preparations took on an ominous significance. Since discovering the conspiracy document, she had worked with the Duke and trusted advisors to prepare for the Caldwell faction's plans. Guards were repositioned, passages secured, and contingency plans established. "You look worried," Lady Margaret observed as they walked the battlements, inspecting flower garlands while reviewing sightlines and guard positions. "Alexander values your counsel highly." "I'm unused to matters of politics and security," Elena replied, though her concerns ran deeper. Each day drew her further from her identity as a simple herbalist and into a world where missteps could cost lives. "You've adapted remarkably well," Margaret countered. "Though I suspect your worries extend beyond security arrangements." "I fear what happens after," Eleanor admitted. When the conspiracy is exposed, the traitors dealt with, my purpose here will be fulfilled, and you believe Alexander will send you back to your village. Margaret's tone suggested she found the notion absurd. Surely you've noticed how he looks at you. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. His grace has been kind, his grace has been besotted, Margaret corrected bluntly. Though I'll thank you not to mention I said so. Before Eleanor could respond, Martha approached. Mistress Blackwell, his grace requests your presence in the Eastern Solar. Elena found Alexander with Master Reynolds and several assistants, reviewing plans of the castle grounds. We're finalizing arrangements for the festival physicians' stations, Alexander explained. I thought you might advise on locations and supplies. Master Reynolds nodded respectfully. Your knowledge of which herbs might be most needed would be invaluable. When the others were dismissed, Alexander handed Elena a sealed letter bearing the royal crest. She opened it, scanning the formal language with surprise. An invitation to attend the festival as an honored guest, rather than serving in the infirmary, she summarized. Why, my request, Alexander replied. You've earned a place among the nobility, not serving them, but this places me at the high table, beside the royal family and your betrothed, precisely where I want you. His expression grew serious. If the Caldwells move against me during the festival, you'll be safer at my side. And I'll have my most trusted advisor nearby. Lady Catherine will be furious. Lady Catherine will maintain perfect court manners regardless of her private feelings, Alexander countered. She understands the consequences of public impropriety. Eleanor's fingers traced the gold-embossed invitation. I have nothing suitable to wear, Alexander smiled. Already addressed. Lady Margaret will escort you to the royal seamstress this afternoon. When Eleanor arrived at the seamstress's chambers, she was shocked to find an elaborate gown of emerald silk. The bodice was embroidered with gold threads, forming patterns of healing herbs intertwined with the hawthorn hawk. This is too fine, she protested during fitting. People will talk. People already talk, Margaret replied. You might as well give them something worth their gossip. The gown transformed Elena from village herbalist to a woman who might belong at court. The reflection showed a stranger, her features enhanced by rich fabric and careful styling. You look beautiful, Margaret said softly, and far more natural in finery than many born to it. As they left, they encountered Baron Reginald Caldwell, Lord James's cousin. His gaze swept over Elena's transformed appearance with disdain. How charming, he commented acidly. Our little herb gatherer playing at nobility. Tell me, does the Duke make all his favorites dress above their station, or are you uniquely privileged? Before either could respond, the Duke himself appeared, his expression cold. She stands above many born to their station, Baron, a fact you would do well to remember. Baron Caldwell bowed stiffly. Of course, Your Grace, merely a jest among friends. We are not friends, Alexander replied. Mistress Blackwell is under my protection. Choose your jests with more care. The Baron retreated, but his look promised this wasn't their final encounter. Alexander turned to Elena, his expression softening. The gown suits you beautifully, he said quietly, though I suspect you would grace any garment with equal dignity. As they parted ways, Eleanor found herself aware of her precarious position. No longer simply the Duke's healer, not truly a noblewoman. She existed in a liminal space that made her both powerful and vulnerable, and as the festival approached, she sensed that both her fate and the Duke's hung in a balance that could tip either way with the slightest pressure. Dawn broke on the first festival day, bathing the castle in golden light. Elena watched from her window as merchants and performers streamed through the gates. Flutists practiced while acrobats stretched and jugglers tested their props. Under different circumstances, the scene would have excited her. Festivals were rare treats in village life. Today, she felt only foreboding. Lieutenant Davis arrived at her door. His Grace requests your presence immediately. She followed through quiet corridors to the Duke's study, where Alexander stood with Captain Harlow and Lord Thomas, bent over a map. Elena, thank you for coming early, Alexander greeted her, fatigue evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. We've received new information, Lord Thomas nodded gravely. My sources confirm armed men have been arriving in small groups, taking lodgings in town. Caldwell loyalists, Captain Harlow added. Disguised as merchants and travellers. How many? Elena asked, dread settling in her stomach. Enough to be concerning, not enough to be obvious, Alexander replied. They're waiting for something or someone. He gestured to a hidden compartment, newly revealed behind a sliding panel. Within lay documents, evidence accumulated over months of investigation. These contain the truth of what we face, Alexander explained. Not just a simple coup attempt, but a coordinated effort to reshape the entire kingdom's power structure. Lord Thomas retrieved a weathered scroll. This treaty dates from your great-grandfather's time. It established the balance between noble privilege and common rights that has maintained peace for generations. A balance the Caldwells wished to shift in favor of nobility, Alexander continued. Their faction has been working toward this for decades, placing supporters in key positions, accumulating wealth, building secret alliances even with foreign powers. Elena connected pieces of a puzzle she hadn't fully understood. The ambush in the forest, it wasn't an isolated attempt on your life, was it? No, Alexander's expression darkened. It was a test, I believe. A trial run for what they plan now. Their ultimate goal is elimination of the entire ruling line, Lord Thomas explained, his voice quavering. Which would leave a vacuum the Caldwell faction stands ready to fill. But why the festival? Elena questioned. Why risk such a public move? The perfect opportunity, Captain Harlow answered. Most of the court gathered in one place, foreign dignitaries present to witness a tragic accident and chaos to mask their actions. Alexander gazed out at the gathering crowds. For generations, House Hawthorne has expanded the rights of common folk. My proposed reforms would accelerate that process, allowing village representatives in the council, reducing noble tax privileges, establishing schools open to all children regardless of birth, reforms that would diminish noble wealth and power, Elena realized. Precisely. Alexander turned back. I believe Catherine was placed in my household years ago as a spy, our betrothal a means to monitor Hawthorne plans. The thought of such deception made Elena's heart ache for him. You've suspected for some time? I've had questions, he admitted. But until you arrived, I had no one I could fully trust outside my immediate circle. The significance of his words hung between them. Lord Thomas cleared his throat. The festival procession remains their likeliest moment to strike. The royal family, you and key supporters all exposed. Then we cancel the procession, Elena suggested, and reveal we know of their plans, Captain Harlow countered. They would simply wait for another opportunity. No, Alexander's voice was resolute. We proceed as planned, but with additional precautions. He turned to Elena. You've earned your place here. But what comes next will be dangerous. I would understand if you chose to return to your village until this is resolved. Elena met his gaze steadily. My place is here. The words carried the weight of a vow. Behind them lay everything unspoken between them. Trust, admiration, and something deeper neither had dared name. Then we prepare. Alexander nodded, gratitude in his eyes. The procession begins at midday. As they dispersed to their tasks, Alexander asked Elena to remain. When they were alone, he removed a sealed letter from a small chest. If something happens to me today, he said quietly, give this to Margaret. It contains instructions, provisions for those loyal to me. He hesitated. Including you. Nothing will happen to you, Elena insisted, though fear clutched at her heart. Nevertheless, he pressed the letter into her hands. Keep it safe. Their fingers touched, lingered, then reluctantly parted. In that brief contact lay 1,000 unspoken words, promises suspended between duty and desire. Outside, the festival drums began to beat, calling the court to the day's ceremonies. Sunlight sparkled off polished armor and jeweled finery as the summer festival procession wound through the castle grounds into town. Nobles rode decorated horses, while musicians played and dancers performed. Commoners lined the streets, throwing flower petals as the Duke passed. Elena rode a cream-colored mare between Lady Margaret and the royal physician. Her emerald gown and gold circlet drew curious glances from townsfolk who recognized their former herbalist, now elevated to court status. She smiled at them, while constantly scanning the crowds for trouble. Captain Harlow had stationed guards along the route, disguised as ordinary festival-goers. The Duke rode tall and seemingly unconcerned, though Elena noticed his hand never strayed far from his sword. Lady Catherine rode nearby, resplendent in crimson and gold, her smile perfect but eyes cold whenever they fell on Elena. "You're doing admirably," Lady Margaret murmured as they approached the town square. "One would think you'd been born to this. I'm merely following instructions and watching for assassins," Margaret added grimly, "not typically part of a lady's festival duties." The procession halted at the grand pavilion in the town centre. Standards bearing the hawthorn hawk fluttered as Alexander dismounted and ascended to address the crowd. Elena's heart pounded as he stood exposed before hundreds. "People of Westmoreland," the Duke's voice carried strong and clear, "we gather to celebrate not just summer's bounty, but the strength of our community, noble and common alike." As Alexander continued, Elena noticed movement in her peripheral vision. Lord James Caldwell was making his way toward the pavilion's side entrance, his expression too intent for casual enjoyment. More concerning was the subtle signal he exchanged with two men positioned near the front. Elena leaned toward Lady Margaret. "Something's happening." "Lord James!" A commotion erupted near the pavilion's entrance. Captain Harlow intercepted Lord James, hand on sword hilt. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear, but the tension was visible. Alexander continued speaking without pause. "This year, we introduce new traditions, a recognition that wisdom and talent exist throughout our society, regardless of birth." On cue, servants began distributing cups of ceremonial wine to nobles in the front rows. Elena watched as a server approached Lady Catherine, offering a silver tray bearing goblets. Catherine selected one with deliberate care, not the nearest, but a specific goblet decorated with emerald stones that matched Elena's gown. A chill ran down Elena's spine as she recalled warnings about ancient noble houses and their methods, poison being a favorite for eliminating rivals without obvious violence. Catherine's insistence that Eleanor would be seated at the high table during the evening feast suddenly took on sinister implications. The server approached their section next. The emerald-decorated goblet was now positioned directly before Elena's place. As the server bowed, Elena noticed a faint residue around the goblet's rim, almost imperceptible except to someone trained to notice such details. "Allow me," she said, reaching past the designated cup to take a plain silver one instead. The server's eyes widened slightly, darting toward Lady Catherine, whose expression remained impassive, though her fingers tightened on her fan. Alexander concluded his speech to thunderous applause. "Now, let us raise our cups in toast to a bountiful harvest and a prosperous future for all Westmoreland." Nobles lifted their goblets. Elena held hers without drinking, watching as Catherine's triumphant smile faltered when she noticed Elena's untouched wine and substituted goblet. Across the pavilion, Alexander caught Elena's eye. With the slightest shake of her head, she signaled danger. The Duke raised his goblet to his lips, but did not drink, merely touching it to his mouth before lowering it. The moment passed without incident, but Elena realized how close they had come to disaster. The goblet meant for her had likely been intended for Alexander. Originally, her unexpected presence forcing Catherine to adjust her plans. As the ceremony concluded and crowds dispersed toward various entertainments, Captain Harlow approached Elena discreetly. "The Duke requests you join him in the merchant's quarter," he murmured. "Something has been discovered," Elena followed, leaving her suspect goblet with instructions to Lady Margaret to ensure it remained untouched. They wound through jubilant crowds to a quiet alley where Alexander waited, his festival finery exchanged for a simpler cloak. "We've found their staging area," he said without preamble, "and evidence confirming our worst fears. The attempt today was merely a diversion. Their main assault is planned for tonight's feast." Elena's mind raced through possibilities. The goblet was a test, then? Or insurance? Alexander's expression was grim. "They have multiple plans in motion. I need you to return to the castle immediately. There's something I must show you before tonight." Torchlight cast dancing shadows across castle walls as evening fell. Elena hurried through corridors toward the Duke's private study, her festival finery exchanged for a simpler gown. Lieutenant Davis shadowed her, hand on sword hilt, eyes scanning for threats. "His Grace awaits within," Captain Harlow said at the study door. "I must return to oversee feast security preparations." Inside, Alexander stood by the fire, examining a tarnished silver badge. "The Royal Guard captain's insignia," he explained. "My father's most trusted man wore this before betraying him to Caldwell's father." Eleanor recognized the significance, history threatening to repeat itself. "You suspect a similar betrayal now?" "I know it. The evidence we discovered confirms it. Captain Reed of the Royal Escort has been compromised." Alexander handed her a document bearing the captain's seal alongside the Caldwell crest. "This outlines positioning that leaves the royal family exposed during the feast. Reed claims it's for better visibility, but it actually creates the perfect opportunity for their assassins. Have you confronted him?" "Not yet. Doing so prematurely would alert others involved." Alexander pocketed the badge. "I've adjusted the guard rotations. Captain Harlow will take Reed's position tonight." Frederick entered hastily. "Your Grace, Lady Catherine requests your presence in the Eastern Solar urgently. She claims it concerns tonight's security." Alexander and Elena exchanged alarmed glances. "Did she say anything else?" "Only that she has information vital to your safety." After Frederick departed, Elena gripped Alexander's arm. It could be a trap, or genuine concern. His skepticism was evident. Catherine is many things, but not a fool. If she senses their plan failing, she might seek to save herself by betraying her co-conspirators. "Let me go with you," Elena insisted. Alexander shook his head. "Too dangerous. The feast begins in an hour. You should prepare." "Alexander," he quieted her with a gentle touch to her cheek. "We knew this day would bring risks. Trust that I take none unnecessarily." His eyes held hers with unspoken emotion. "If anything happens, remember what I gave you." The sealed letter felt heavy in Elena's pocket as she watched him leave. An hour later, the great hall blazed with candles. Nobles in their finest regalia took places at long tables. Elena entered on Lord Thomas's arm, her emerald gown drawing appreciative glances. "The Duke hasn't arrived," Thomas murmured, as they took their places. "Most unusual." Elena's sense of foreboding deepened. Alexander's absence was concerning. He valued punctuality, especially for state occasions. "And Lady Catherine?" "Also absent," Thomas confirmed. The royal trumpet sounded, announcing the king's arrival. Elena scanned the hall, noting Captain Reed still commanding the royal guard, not Captain Harlow as planned. The altered arrangements Alexander had described were nowhere in evidence. Something had gone terribly wrong. The royal party seated, nobles followed suit. 20 agonizing minutes passed before Alexander finally appeared through a side door, his festival finery disheveled, a small cut visible on his cheekbone. He caught Elena's eye across the hall, subtly warning her to remain in place. Commotion erupted at the main entrance. Baron Caldwell entered with armed men bearing the royal insignia. Though Eleanor recognized several faces from suspicious groups Captain Harlow had been monitoring. "Your Majesty," Caldwell announced loudly, "I come bearing grave news. There is a traitor in our midst." The hall fell silent as Caldwell approached the royal table, Captain Reed at his side. "Duke Alexander Hawthorne has been plotting against your Majesty's life, using today's festival as cover for his treasonous ambitions." Gasps spread through the stunned assembly. The king's expression remained neutral. "These are serious accusations, Baron. What evidence do you present?" Reed produced a document bearing the Hawthorne seal. "Battle plans found in His Grace's private study, Your Majesty, detailing an assault on the royal family during tonight's feast." Elena recognized the document instantly. It was Alexander's defensive strategy, twisted to appear as an attack plan. "Seize the Duke," Reed commanded his guards. Alexander made no move to flee, his calm demeanor at odds with the chaos unfolding. His eyes sought Elena's, communicating silently, "Trust me. Be ready." As guards surrounded Alexander, a figure slipped through a hidden door behind the royal table. Lady Catherine, her face pale but determined. In her hand gleamed a small dagger. Eleanor reacted without thinking, pushing past startled nobles toward the high table. "Your Majesty, behind you." Everything happened at once. Catherine lunged toward the king. Alexander broke free from the guards, moving with surprising speed. Captain Harlow drew his sword against Reed, and Elena, driven by instinct alone, threw herself between Catherine and her target. Pain lanced through Elena's shoulder as Catherine's dagger found flesh instead of its intended royal target. She stumbled backward, warm blood seeping through her fingers. Around her, chaos erupted, guards clashing with Caldwell's men, nobles screaming and overturning tables in their haste to escape. Through blurring vision, Elena saw Alexander leap forward, disarming Catherine with practiced efficiency. The king's guards formed a protective circle, while Captain Harlow engaged Captain Reed in a fierce duel that ended with Reed on his knees. "Stand down!" Alexander's commanding voice cut through the din. "The king is safe. The traitors are exposed." Baron Caldwell attempted to flee, but loyal guards blocked the exits. Elena sank to her knees, the room spinning. Lady Margaret appeared at her side, pressing a cloth against the wound. "Hold on, my dear," she urged, her voice tight with concern. "Help is coming." The next hours passed in fragments. Elena remembered being carried to the infirmary. Master Reynolds, working over her with grim concentration, murmured conversations about poison on the blade and antidotes. Throughout her feverish haze, when Constant remained, Alexander's presence nearby, his voice issuing commands, his hand occasionally clasping hers. Morning light streamed through infirmary windows when Elena finally woke fully, her mind clear, though her body felt weak. Her shoulder was tightly bandaged, the pain dulled. She turned her head to find Alexander dozing in a chair beside her bed, still in his blood-stained festival clothing. "Your Grace," she whispered, her throat dry. He woke instantly, relief flooding his face. "Elena." He moved to pour water for her. "Master Reynolds said you would recover, but the hours were uncertain. The king—" "Safe, thanks to you." Pride and something deeper colored his voice. "Your actions revealed the truth before all witnesses. There can be no doubt where loyalties truly lay, Lady Catherine. Confined awaiting trial, along with the Caldwells and 19 other conspirators. Their plan failed utterly. Instead of establishing their new order, they've ensured the downfall of their houses." Elena processed this slowly. "And now?" "Now begins the difficult work of reconstruction." Alexander straightened, wincing slightly, revealing a bandage beneath his sleeve. "The king has authorized immediate implementation of the reforms the Caldwells so violently opposed. By royal proclamation, the Council of Peers will now include representatives from common guilds and town councils. The significance of this change, a fundamental shift in how the kingdom governed itself, momentarily overshadowed Elena's physical discomfort. That's extraordinary. The beginning of many changes." Alexander's gaze held hers, "including changes to inheritance laws, education access, and," he hesitated, "customs regarding suitable marriages for nobility." Before Eleanor could absorb the implications, the infirmary doors opened to admit the king himself. Alexander rose immediately, bowing deeply despite his obvious fatigue. The king approached Elena's bedside. "So, this is the herbalist who has twice saved the Hawthorne line, and now the royal one as well." Elena attempted to rise, but the king gestured for her to remain still. "Your actions have earned you rest, Mistress Blackwell, and far more besides," he turned to Alexander. "The documents are prepared as you requested, nephew." Alexander accepted a scroll bearing the royal seal. "Thank you, uncle." When the king departed, Alexander turned back to Elena. "Once you've recovered, there is a formal position I would ask you to consider." "Position?" "Royal herbalist," he explained, "with authority to establish a school, combining traditional healing knowledge with formal medical training. Master Reynolds has already expressed his support." Elena tried to imagine it. A formal role at court, a bridge between worlds, an opportunity to preserve and expand the knowledge passed down through generations. "That's a generous offer," she managed, emotion constricting her throat. "It is entirely selfish," Alexander countered softly. "It keeps you at court, where I have grown accustomed to your counsel and your company." The unspoken question hung between them, too fragile yet for direct words. Elena thought of her village, of the life she had led before fate placed her in a wounded duke's path. That life seemed distant now, belonging to a different woman. "I would be honored to accept," she said finally. Alexander's smile lit his exhausted face. "Then rest and heal. There is much work ahead, and I find I have little patience for beginning it without you by my side." Later that day, a royal proclamation was read in the town square and dispatched throughout the realm. It outlined the exposed conspiracy, the new reforms, and the elevation of Elena Blackwell to the position of royal herbalist, the first commoner to hold a titled court position in the kingdom's history, as nobles and commoners alike absorbed these unprecedented changes. Elena carefully read a personal letter Alexander had left with her, words revealing feelings long contained behind duty and tradition, now freed by the upheaval of the old order. 1 month after the failed coup, Elena stood in her medicinal garden, harvesting chamomile blossoms. Her wounded shoulder had healed well, though it still ached when rain threatened. The garden had flourished under her care, once neglected beds now bursting with healing herbs. She heard footsteps and turned to find Alexander watching her, his expression warm. "You've created something remarkable here," he observed. "Merely restored what your great-grandmother envisioned," Elena replied, dropping blossoms into her basket. "Though I've added some varieties from Willowbrook." They walked together along the garden paths. The festival events had altered court dynamics profoundly. With the Caldwell faction's treachery exposed, opposition to Alexander's reforms had crumbled. Implementation had begun swiftly, education initiatives, tax restructuring, and most significantly, the Council of Peers now included 6 commoner representatives. "I've had word from Willowbrook," Elena said. "The new clinic building is nearly complete. The first of many," Alexander nodded. "Your apprenticeship program has already received applications from throughout the duchy." "Young women who would never have had such opportunities before," she agreed, thinking of the eager faces she'd interviewed, girls with healing instincts like hers. But now, with paths she could only have dreamed of. "You've accomplished much in a short time," Alexander observed. "Court deaths from fever have halved since your treatments were implemented. A beginning only." Elena faced him directly, "Though I sometimes wonder if my usefulness will eventually reach its limit." "Once your reforms are established and the medical school operating independently," Alexander took her hands in his. "Elena, surely you understand that your value has never been measured solely by your skills, essential though they are." The tenderness in his voice sent warmth through her. Their relationship had deepened beyond professional collaboration, beyond friendship, into something neither had explicitly named, but both increasingly acknowledged. "I received a letter from the king this morning," Alexander continued. "The annulment of my betrothal to Lady Catherine has been formally approved." Elena's breath caught. "So quickly?" "Treason simplifies certain processes," he replied with dry humor. "Her involvement in a plot against the crown made the decision straightforward." A breeze stirred the garden, carrying mingled scents of lavender and rosemary. Birds called from nearby trees. Here, in this sanctuary they had rebuilt together, time seemed suspended. The king also approved my petition regarding marriage reforms, Alexander said softly. The decree will be announced tomorrow, but I wanted you to know first. Henceforth, nobility may wed outside their class without royal dispensation or loss of title. Elena stared at him, scarcely believing the implications. Alexander! He withdrew a simple circlet woven from fresh herbs, lavender for devotion, rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, and tiny white flowers she recognized from the meadows near her village. In Willowbrook, he said, I'm told that when a man wishes to propose marriage, tradition suggests he offer something representing his beloved's heritage. Elena's eyes filled with tears as he placed the herbal crown on her head. This man who commanded armies had taken time to learn village customs, to gather herbs with his own hands, to honor her roots even as he offered her a future beyond imagination. I love you, Elena Blackwell, he said simply. Not for your healing skills, though they are remarkable. Not for your wisdom in counsel, though I've come to rely on it. Not even for your courage, which has twice saved my life. I love you for your heart, which saw me first as a man in need before recognizing me as a duke. Elena touched the herb crown. The court will talk. The court always talks. Let them speak of how their duke chose a woman of substance over one of mere circumstance of birth. And the king approves wholeheartedly. He mentioned that any children would likely inherit your common sense rather than the notorious Hawthorne stubbornness, which he considers a diplomatic advantage. Eleanor laughed, her hesitation dissolving. Then yes, Alexander Hawthorne, I will marry you, stubborn nature and all. He drew her into his arms and kissed her with the freedom of a man unbound from tradition's constraints. Around them, the garden witnessed their pledge, where healing herbs grew alongside beauty, where knowledge bridged worlds, and where a simple herbalist and a visionary duke had discovered that true nobility resided in the heart.